And we're live. Welcome, everybody. This is the Reality Czars podcast, and I'm your only host tonight, Nate. Tony's at work, unfortunately, and we have the great Ricky Varandas with us. Brother, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I wanted to talk to you for a long-ass time, actually, and thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to tell our guests a little bit, our listeners, where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find just about all my work on the rippleeffectpodcast.com or rickyvarandas.com. Both URLs will bring you to the same place. But basically, if you go there, you'll find all the social media platforms I'm on. You'll find all the video platforms I'm on. I'm on just about all of them, minus YouTube. I do have a new YouTube channel, but I'm just posting clips so I can kind of keep some presence on YouTube without getting banned again. And then audio-wise, I'm available everywhere. The Ripple Effect Podcast. Just search Ripple Effect Podcast. You'll find on Spotify, iTunes, whatever app you use. And then I also host another show called The Union of Unwanted, which I'm sure some of you might have heard of, with Sam Tripoli from the many shows he does. Midnight Mike from the OBDM show, and then Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions, and also well known for the couple books that he's written, which are awesome. So, but yeah, those are kind of my two main shows. And then every once in a while, when I get over my imposter syndrome of feeling like, what do I have profound to say, I do a little solo show called Ricky Rants on Rockfin, which is just a solo show that I do on Rockfin, where I kind of just discuss what's on my mind, or something that's kind of been just something I wanted to share with the listeners. And it always starts off as like, I don't have anything to say, how am I going to fill up 20 minutes or a half an hour to make it worth posting? And then 20 minutes to a half an hour into it, I can't shut the hell up. So, but I guess that's probably one of the reasons why we started a podcast. I mean, you have to be able to talk a little bit. You can't just put all the pressure on the guests to hold a conversation.
100%, man. I think podcasting has probably saved my marriage, just because I can't stop talking about this kind of shit, and it gives my wife a nice break if I'm over here ranting, and then I get it out of my system too, so that I can be normal again. So it's probably great for her too.
Well, it's funny because I remember talking to James Corbett about this, because we had similar experiences. How neither of our wives care at all about what we do. It's you get so excited about. I remember the first time I had Jesse Ventura on the show, or we watched. I've been lucky enough where I've had quite a few films.
Was this pre-Rona, Jesse Ventura?
Yes, this is way pre-Rona. Yeah, this was when he was still a conspiracy theorist, because apparently Rona meant that now you trust the government and there's no conspiracies at all. It's just hilarious. It's wild. I remember talking to Sean when I had Sean Stone on a couple Union of Unwanted. Yeah, he did a couple Union of Unwanteds in a row, but the first one he recently was on, he was going to come on my show, and then our schedules were conflicting a little bit, and I'm just like, hey, can you just make it to Monday's Union of Unwanted? And he's like, you know what? Yeah, maybe I'll come on, because he's never been on one. And I think I asked him on that episode, dude, you're friends with Tyrell. I've had Tyrell, his son, on the show too. He actually was on the show, the episode right before Jesse Ventura. And I remember that because it's just coincidental that I end up getting a hold of both of them, and they both end up scheduling back to back. But I'm just like, dude, you're friends with Tyrell. You're friends with Jesse Ventura. What is going on here? How did you fall for this? How did he fall for this? And I don't know, man. It just seems, I don't think there's any real straightforward answer. I think there's a lot of people we can look at and just say, okay, what was it for them? And I don't think there's a general answer. I think each person's individually different. I think some people really, really hated Trump. I think some people felt for the media propaganda. I think some people were really just afraid, and the fear mongering worked. And if they had any doubts about media or big pharma or any of these things, I think that went out the window, because they were once I always say, once something like that happens, it puts your it puts your beliefs to the test. Like how truly, how true are you to your beliefs? And I think some people, when they got tested, they're like, you know what? Like I think media is bullshit. Yeah, I think big pharma lies, but my life's in danger or I could be in danger. So I'm just going to take their word for it this time, and it's like, come on, man. Like, so yeah, we live in a weird time where I think a lot of people got exposed during 2020 in regards to just not being as true to their beliefs or, as we maybe thought they were, and there was quite a few people. I mean, musicians, people in alternative media. I was talking to, Pasta from the Convo Couch not too long ago. Actually, I think it was this week on the phone about something else, and then I don't know how it got brought up, but we were talking about how I'm a big fan of Abby Martin, right? And how I remember watching Breaking the Set back in the day, like before I couldn't wait. Like every morning I would go on to her YouTube channel and I would watch the new episode. And typically I wouldn't watch it live, but they uploaded it the same day, and I'd watch it the next morning. It would be like my little piece of news, and she always had really good just interviews on there. A lot of people that have been on my show, like Russ Baker and other great people. And like when COVID happened, it was just like her and her brother just lost their minds in regards to just drinking the Kool-Aid. And it's not to say that they
I
haven't.
didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you listen to Media Roots, like and it's funny because I actually had Robbie Martin on before the You and Unwanted was started, which was kind of post COVID, right before COVID or right around the time that it started kind of becoming a hot topic in the U.S. I did like kind of a round table. I used to do a lot of like just multiple guests on a show because I enjoyed like kind of bouncing ideas off each other and getting people different perspectives on a topic. And I did one with Robbie. Robbie was actually, somewhat of a regular on my show. And it was him, and I want to say it was Sam Tripoli and maybe Jeffrey Wilson from The Conspiracy Farm with Pat Miletich. But I can't remember who else was on it, but it was a few of us, and we're talking. And he was pretty old, and I think Charlie might have been on that too. And we were all talking about what could happen or whatever, and he didn't seem to resist that much. I feel like it's one of those things where if I had him on a podcast and we discussed it in a civil manner, like I could probably find some places where we agree, and he'd be like, you know what, yeah, you're right, And then, but I think when he's on Media Roots with Abby, his sister, and there's not anybody kind of, I guess, pushing back with the alternative perspectives, then it's easier to kind of just believe that like, hey, what I'm saying is true, and what the people I disagree with are wrong. And that's always like the concern with like creating your own echo chamber and not really talking to people who disagree with you. I love talking to people I disagree with. I think I want my beliefs to be challenged. I want to because in challenging them, I'm going to find out if they make sense or if if I've made a good argument prior to establishing some belief or some something that I subscribe to. And so, I think there's always a danger of like doing these like solo podcasts where it's just you or just you and a co-host who have the exact same perspective, which is kind of the case with Abby and Robbie. And, again, it's not to say that they don't do great work because there's plenty of people that I disagree with on things.
Abby Martin, my favorite communist. I like Abby Martin a lot, man. She's awesome. She's so good on the Empire. She's fucking brilliant. Yeah, she's so anti-war. Like, yeah, Abby Martin's amazing. Yeah, that's really too bad. But I mean, that's something that you brought up earlier was you just said that some people couldn't handle their distaste for Trump. And it's funny, man. It's just like he changed politics. Like politics were already divided and ugly. And then he just came in like a fucking wedge and really drove people nuts. Some people never got over it and like they couldn't look at him and like say like, hey, maybe this aspect of him's okay, this aspect of him is terrible, or yes, he's a piece of shit. But they couldn't. There was no fair. You couldn't like even look at him. He was just anything he said. And then I'm thinking, someone like Abby Martin and probably your brother, it became such a political thing that like they couldn't be fair on it, or else they'd be cast out of like the religion of woke. You know, they would be cast out of the left. Like you can't not conform, and it's tragic. Because I used to be a leftist. I used to be on that side, so I know how it goes.
Well, it's like that saying, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative when you're old, you don't have a brain. And it's true in a way. And I think a little bit of it is because of what's important to you at those points in your life. When you're young, you don't really care about being taxed or freedoms. You typically, your parents are they're already restricting your freedoms, and and that type of stuff anyways. So you don't really look at the government as another person who's restricting your freedoms. And then as you get older, you start worrying about being taxed or having the freedom to do things and whatnot. And it's like, now I'm an adult. Like I'm not supposed to have a big brother that tells me what to do, but now big brother's telling me what to do or what I can't do. And so I think what is important to you changes. And like you said about the Trump thing, it's absolutely true. I've said multiple times on my show, nobody voted for Biden. They voted for Trump or against Trump, and they didn't really care who was running against him. And that was how strong the hatred for him was. I mean, it's weird because in a way, it's like he's not as bad as everybody makes him out to be, but there definitely were some character flaws in regards to him, like making fun of. I think one time he made fun of like a crippled guy or whatever. Like these things that you're like, okay, maybe he's not the most sensitive person in the world. But again, like you one thing doesn't represent everything about him. And it's like, okay, well, he could be wrong in this one example. And I could find an example where he was right or did something good. I mean, I know it didn't really it didn't turn into anything. But when he brought both Koreas together and just to meet, I mean, that was kind of historical. I mean, that was kind of a big deal. Nothing really came out of it, but the fact that he even attempted it and got it planned, and then of course you get the people who are like, well, he did everything the AIPAC wanted, and he was a Jewish shill, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I get that, so and he was bad in that, but he also didn't start any wars, and then people will say, well, he didn't end any wars. I'm like, okay, but he didn't start any wars, which means there's one less war that we have to end in the first place, which is something we have to at least consider when all the past presidents in recent history have all started wars. So it's like you got to give him his due. And politics is just a dirty game. You're not going to find any perfect person who's going to get all the way to the office. Now, I mean, you can, and then there's different ways of looking at it. You can look at it as the whole system's corrupt. I don't want to participate, which I completely agree with, and I completely I can connect with that perspective of like, okay, yeah, like knowing what I know and the power of lobbyists and the Carlyle Group and Lockheed Martin and Big Pharma, Pfizer, whoever, Halliburton, like all these players in the background, the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg, secret societies like Skull and Crossbones, and like all these wild think tanks, and it's like there's so many people who are really pulling the strings in the background. Like I get the idea of like, well, it's all just nonsense. Why participate? But I also see the perspective of like, okay, well, not participating doesn't change anything. Like it's not going to, like, either way, some president's going to get going to be the president. Somebody running, some candidate's going to become the president if I like it or not. So should I just vote for somebody who I think would be the least of two evils? And that's kind of like the reoccurring theme where people are just like, no, you shouldn't vote for the least of two evils. Some people think you should. And I don't know if there, like many things in life, I'm not sure there is a right or wrong answer.
Is this the conversation you guys had with the anarchists versus statists? I haven't watched it yet, but I really want to. That would have been a fun one to be in. I love that argument.
Well, it's funny. Well, we could probably have a better Anarchist First State is a debate now, just because honestly it didn't go as planned, because I kind of wanted a little bit more debate, and
Yeah.
I was trying to even it out with people from the left and people from the right, or not from the right, but people who are more libertarian in their perspectives, and just about everybody agreed on everything, and I was just like, okay, well, can we, and I kept like trying to like spark the debate a little bit, not because I wanted friction, but because I really wanted these ideas tested, and I wanted people, and it was like, oh, everybody just, talked about government overreach, and everybody talked about money in politics, and like these things that are kind of like we all kind of agree on, but we didn't get below that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the unions don't want it. It works because people are respectful. People, everybody seems to get along. Everybody seems to like each other, which I think is awesome. But I definitely think that there could be a little bit more of challenging of ideas, and I think it'd be beneficial. In the past, I've had, you know who Brian Callen is?
Mm-hmm.
So Brian Callen used to have a show called the Brian Callen Show, which morphed into Mixed Mental Arts. And I think by the end of Mixed Mental Arts, I think he went back to the Brian Callen Show, or he named, I don't know. Either way, it went back and forth between Mixed Mental Arts and Brian Callen, the Brian Callen Show. But it was the same show, same host was Brian Callen and his co-host, Hunter Motz. And it was the two of them, and they would interview authors, typically intellectuals, stuff like that. And he would, Hunter Motz and I became friends. We ended up doing a bunch of shows together, and Hunter Motz isn't really a libertarian, and isn't a big fan of like people like Peter Schiff or Tom Woods so I end up having him.
I love all those guys.
What's that?
I said I love all those guys. I love Peter Schiff and Tom Woods.
So me and Hunter got pretty friendly. We did a lot of shows together. He was a blast to talk to, very thought provoking, and so I ended up asking him if he wanted to have a debate with Adam Kokesh, and because at the time Adam Kokesh was recently on my show, and I'm like, hey, how about we get together? I'm like, you're open to debate, Hunter's open to debating, and let's have a friendly kind of discussion. So we did one episode, ended up being going really well and being really fun and I think productive. So we ended up doing a part 2, and then I did the same thing with Hunter because I'm like, okay, well, this is so much fun, and I'm learning from this process. Let me see if I can kind of recreate it, and I did with James Corbett. I had him on with James Corbett, but Hunter Motz did kind of get exposed, and what the topic was more about education, because Hunter Motz had a tutoring company, and he's a Harvard graduate who thinks his Harvard diploma doesn't mean shit, and actually in many cases have talked about doing a public burning of it. And James Corbett obviously ended up in Japan because teaching. So they both kind of had a little bit of a teaching background and opinions on schooling and whatnot. So we had a fun discussion. Did part 1, then did a part 2. Hunter Motz did get exposed a little bit as prejudging a little bit of James Corbett, because he said something. I don't know. I think it was the first episode or maybe the second episode we did part 2. But he said something like he kind of labeled Corbett as a conspiracy theorist, and I'm like, oh god. I'm like, he must have Googled Corbett. This is when he was still on YouTube, found some like 9/11 thing or whatever, something that he probably spent zero time looking into, but just the fact that Corbett was hitting on these topics and doing documentaries on these topics, he probably just assumed he's a conspiracy theorist. And so I'm like, and I told Hunter that too. I'm like, dude, like, he's not a conspiracy theorist. I'm like, some of these topics that you think you really disagree with him on, I'm like, I bet you if you looked into or gave his research a opportunity to change your mind, it probably would. And but those discussions actually were exactly what I was trying to create with the Union Unwanted, like people actually challenging ideas, and I don't know, it just didn't, things don't always turn out the way you plan them, but I want to see people argue for or against universal health care. I want people to argue for or against universal basic income. I want people to argue everything to the extreme of like, okay, should we have police officers, paid by the public, or should we have private security? Well, all these kind of discussions that come with this stuff, and everything's kind of like it's a mixture of, there's never been a 100% obviously capitalistic country, but there's never been a 100% socialistic country, and there probably will never be either or any ism you can come up with, because the one thing that they all have in common is they have to be run by people, and people are flawed, and there's going to be corrupt people. So you're neither or any really ism is going to be you won't be able to examine it and say, hey, you know what, like this was a perfect example of how something does or does not work, because there's so many other factors. People will bring up Venezuela, right, or some other Latin American country, and it's like, okay, well, do you know the history of that country? Do you know how like the U.S. has meddled in their elections and all this? So it's like you can say, oh, look at Venezuela, like that's an example of a socialist country not working. It's like, kind of, if you completely disregard everything else. Same thing with Cuba, same thing with but you can make the same argument for a more capitalistic country too, and you could say, okay, well, maybe it didn't work because the politicians were corrupt, or the corporations were corrupt, or whatever. So I think humans are flawed, and anytime you have flawed humans trying to run something, there's going to be some issues. So it's like, what's your opinion on all that stuff? Do you like seeing those debates, or do you
love seeing those debates, man? I love debating. I love getting into that. I mean, I think that's why people become libertarians, because we're we're contrarian a-holes that like to say their opinion and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it just, on any of those things, it's like, I don't think that pure capitalism can exist within a state, because automatically, if there's a state, it's going to be corrupted. And so there is no such thing as a pure capitalist country, because it's an oxymoron. It couldn't exist. And then with communism, it's like, and theoretically, it would be great for it to have some sort of because their ultimate goal is to have like a stateless society with no hierarchies. And it's not possible, because how would you equitably split everything? It's not possible without the dictator. And so they even say that they want like a dictator of the proletariat that can do all these things, but that automatically creates hierarchy. And then you have like the cronies, and then then you have the Soviet Union, So, I mean, that's just one of those things that happens, man. So we need to have I want to have like small little communities that are like self-sustaining and just like have bartering system, and we just kind of take care of each other. Like, that's what I would prefer.
Yeah, I've had Professor Richard Wolff on my show before, and I've also he did a pretty good episode of Empire Files on Karl Marx and his philosophies and all that stuff. And if you look into Karl Marx and you actually read his perspectives and opinions, and again, like, you read somebody else's opinions and perspectives on his opinions, it can be skewed one way or another. I mean, I had Professor Michael Millerman on my show not too long ago, and he's a super fascinating guy. He's a philosopher, author, historian. I mean, many different things, but he's well known for translating Alexander Dugin's books, which is he's considered
an interesting guy.
Yeah. Oh, I love him as a thinker. Like, I don't agree with everything, and I'm not even sure. I can't say I agree or disagree, because some of his ideas are so complex. I need to kind of examine them and kind of figure out if it makes sense or not. But the
translation is hard too. Like, it's really hard. I want to understand it better. I've definitely dug into him a little bit, but sorry.
No, go ahead. No, but my point of bringing it up was that who translates it will have an effect on how you're going to interpret it, right? And that's something that he talked a lot about. Like, so Millerman's a big fan of Leo Strauss, and he talked about how the philosophers that translated Plato or some of these the philosophers you learn when you go to philosophy, like his philosophy teacher was a Leo Strauss fan. So a lot of it was from a Strauss perspective, the way he interpreted Plato, the Republic, whatever it may be, and that affected his interpretation of it, and he was interpreting it different than somebody else, and and it brings up that discussion, right? It's like a lot of what you hear somebody talk about. Karl Marx believes in this, or you could even go back to like Darwin. Darwin, believed in this. Darwin believed. I'm like, okay, well, let me look into this, and it's like, okay, well, this seems like to be more of a opinion than like fact. Or you could highlight one thing he said and then use that to defend the perspective you have. But I can find somebody else who disagrees, and then he says that Darwin said this at this point, or wrote this in this chapter. That so it's like everything's, so much of it is interpretation, and so when you look at like Karl Marx and you look at like his critique of capitalism, like I'm like, okay, it kind of makes sense in theory, like there are issues, with this stuff. But of course, you can also make the argument there's some serious issues with socialism, and but again, like I don't think inherently they're evil or designed to do bad things. I think they're probably thought at, like it in other words, it's almost like we have a society, we have a world full of people, and then we have to debate and figure out what's the best way of having this society and this, a civil society, and do we have a socialist, something that's more socialistic? Do we have something that's less socialistic? And it's all for the purpose of like trying to figure out how to extract the best out of our civilized society. And I don't, I mean, maybe you disagree with me. Well, like, do you think Karl Marx had evil intentions, or do you think it was his views, and was all just based on his image of what he thought the world could be, even if it wasn't realistically, maybe it wouldn't work, but in theory he thought it would.
So my thoughts on Karl Marx, it really does come down to intent, right? So I think that he makes some fan-fucking-tastic critiques of capitalism. Like, for the most part, like I read it and I'm like, okay, I'm on board. And then when it comes to solutions is where he loses me, right? And so it's not necessarily like Karl Marx. Maybe we have to look at his character as a person a little bit, right? Where he like got a girl pregnant and kicked her out of the house and kicked the kid out. Like, he just kind of seemed like kind of an ugly human a little bit. And so maybe I can read some intent there, but I mean, that's just speculation. But as far as like him actually being like evil, I don't necessarily think so. Maybe he was like a utopian kind of thinker, and he thought that he was brilliant and that he had a better idea of how to run things. And I mean, really, when it starts to get to more of the evil, it's like, dude, read some Lenin. Like, Lenin is a beautiful writer, and he's like, but good God, like, and then obviously like Stalin takes it to another level. So I think that he created a system that was easily gives justification for this person to say, hey, this is how we're going to fix the world. And it gives them too much of like a consolidation of power. And it just kind of opened Pandora's box, and it was turned really ugly. So I don't really know what his intention was, but I'd like to think that he was just a fool, a very smart fool.
No, that's a really good point. This idea that he had these ideas, they weren't inherently evil, but they were easily manipulated or used for evil purposes, and so that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, in defense of all his personal life, there's a lot of really great, I shouldn't say great people, but people who've done great work who were horrendous, in their personal lives. They either cheated or, just weren't good people in general. I was listening to a Rogan podcast recently, and it's funny because I've thought about this quite a few times, but somebody said it on the show. They're like, a lot of really successful guys, men, are horrendous fathers, and I think a lot of it has to do with like you've decided that the job of pursuing whatever goal you have in mind is more important than the job of being a parent, and it's almost like to be OCD obsessive with progress, then it's one of those things that you something has to give, so you have to neglect something, right? Everything comes with a sacrifice. If you have a multi-million dollar house, some people get lucky and they hit the lottery, or get lucky and they invested in Bitcoin early enough, or whatever it may be. But most people, they're sacrificing being with their loved ones, being with their friends. They're at work 24/7. They're taking calls on weekends. They're maybe going traveling for work, whatever. So everything comes with a sacrifice. So I think that that's why that balance is so important. Did a message pop up? Is that I saw that?
Yeah. I throw the comments up here. We had someone asking if the Union and Wanted is still going. Yes, it is. So go check it out. They just had one come out. So.
Yeah, for people who are listening who aren't familiar with it or don't know where to find it, what it is, it's kind of like a big Zoom conference call of alternative media thinkers. It came from actually, I was talking about how I like doing swap casts and getting people together. It was actually a show where I had Midnight Mike on my show. I had Charlie Robinson, and then at the last second, I invited a couple other people, and the only other person who showed up was Sam. And so it was the four of us, and we were talking about, this was like right in the beginning of the COVID stuff, and when the censorship was really, just amplifying. And then Midnight Mike from the OBDM show, he's like, yeah, us, and he was referring to us in alternative media who's being censored by Google and YouTube and everybody. He's like, yeah, we're kind of like the Union of the Unwanted. And immediately we all kind of like, we thought the same thing. Like, I don't know what we're going to do with that name, but that's something. Like, hold on to that, because there's a ring to it. It just sounds like something that would be a great name for a band or something. I love the episode. Monica Perez is on like probably 75% of them, so you like about 75% of the episodes. But she's a regular on there. Miriam Haneen's a regular on there. Jason Burmess, so we basically thought about the origin story. Is we basically thought about gathering a bunch of these people who were being censored, and then try to figure out, how do we resolve it? How do we figure it out? And so we, I've been podcasting for a while. Sam's has a lot of contacts. Charlie, Mike, everybody's kind of been around the alternative media community for a while. But I went buck wild with with inviting people, and we had 30, 40 people. So it was like a ridiculous number. The first official Union of the Unwanted. And we had some big names. I mean, James Corbett was on there. Ben Swan, Luke from We Are Change. Had tons of people on there, and just kind of talking about what do we do? What are we dealing with, first of all, as individuals and content creators, who's being censored and what type of censorship are you seeing? And then we were talking about solutions, and then I kind of really liked it. I remember right after that show happened, I was texting with the guys, with Mike and Sam and Charlie, and I'm like, we got to do something. Let's do this on a regular basis, and then that's when we eventually now we have a purpose for the title, the Union of the Unwanted. And initially it was supposed to be just what we were calling those episodes, and we were letting people just kind of share them on everybody's RSS feed. You could just share wherever. And then as time went by, I think it might have been Sam who proposed the idea of making it its own podcast. I'm like, you know what? Why not? Let's do it. So we end up doing that and making it its own podcast, but it's live streamed every other Monday on Rockfin. And then within a couple days, it's available. The audio is available. Typically, Mike's pretty quick with it. He usually within 24 to 48 hours, the audio is always available. The video is on Rockfin as a premium content when it's live streamed, and then within a couple of days. Typically, I go in there and I'll just make it free within a couple of days so people can see it. But Mike also uploads it to our Odyssey channel. And if you go to the unionoftheunwanted.com, you'll find all our links there. But it's live streamed on Rockfin, has premium content, but within 24 to 48 hours, you can find the audio and video free everywhere. And it's awesome. I mean, we've had so many amazing people on there. We've had Dr. Judy Mikovich, we've had Del Bigtree, we've had G. Edward Griffin's been on. We've had Roger Stone. A lot of it's just been people that have been on my show that I'm just like, hey, do you want to also come on the Union of Unwanted? So typically, if you see somebody pop up on my show, like, or if somebody who's been on my show, I'll eventually, invite them on the Union of Unwanted, and that's more just because like that way I kind of get a feel for a guest. I don't like just trying to get somebody on for the Union of Unwanted first if they haven't been on one of our other shows. Charlie, Mike's, or Sam's, because it's like, okay, we know they're cool, we know they're going to get along. The format's not for everybody. We've heard people complain about it in the past, like, hey, there's too many people on the show. It's like, well, there's a lot of one-on-one shows out there. Like, you don't have to listen to this if you don't like it. But that's what makes it unique, is that there is a lot of people on there, and it works because, I think what makes it fascinating is that you get people connecting that would never ever connect, or people from such drastic different opinions and backgrounds, and for them to come together and then bounce ideas off each other. Like, I think that's awesome, and to get that. I mean, I had it was funny because Steve from Slow News Day, him and I weren't really that close before his first Union of Unwanted episode. I believe him and Charlie have done some work together, some shows together. So Charlie invited him to come on a Union of Unwanted show. And, typically I do like 99% of the booking, but if these guys, that they want to invite somebody, they invite them, but I'm just like a little social butterfly. So it's easy for me to kind of contact people and book them. And I enjoy doing it. And he ended up coming on, Steve, his first episode of the Union of Unwanted was the same episode that Roger Stone was on, and and I don't tell anybody who's gonna. I don't tell anybody who I'm trying to get on, because I don't want to jinx myself, and also there's a lot. There's a lot of people that I invite who don't end up making it. There's people that I forgot I invited that end up showing up. So it always ends up being a mixture of people. But I remember at the time I was like, oh, we need kind of a bigger name. We on the next one. So I'm like, let me try to find someone. In the last second, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I haven't talked to Roger in a long time. Let me see if I can get a hold of him. I talked to him. He came on. Most of the people were like kind of stunned that he was on. And Steve was like, you could tell he's not a fan of Roger Stone. And I think on his own show the next day, I ended up hearing him say something like, oh, dude, I came on the show. He's like, then freaking Roger Stone's on the show. Like, he couldn't believe that he was on a show with somebody he didn't like that. But I'm like, that's what makes it fun, though. Like, you can't say there's not something we can't take from talking to Roger Stone. The dude has been in the same private jet with Reagan and Nixon, and he dibble dabbles with all these people. Like, you can't to be able to talk to somebody who's been that close to people of the White House and the highest of power. Like, you can't say you can't. There's not something you can take from that. There's going to be questions that you can ask him that he can give you an insight. I mean, he's probably lying, yeah. But he can give you if he's telling you the truth, he can give you a insight into something that in no other time would you be able to talk to somebody that close to presidents and advisors and all those people in the higher ups. So it to me, it doesn't matter if I disagree with him or don't, if I do or don't. I just want to talk to them, and the cool thing about a lot of the people I'm friends with, they're very similar. I remember Charlie Robinson and I don't know if it was right before we did a show together, or maybe right before the next Union of Unwanted, but we were chatting right before or right after I did my show with Professor Richard Wolff, who is well known for being, a socialist and Marxist historian, or however you want to call it. And Charlie, who is very libertarian ish. I don't know if he uses the label, but he very much leans in that direction and goes to anarcho-pocos and all that stuff. He right before we went live, he's like, hey, I listened to your show with Professor Richard Wolff. He's like, it was super awesome. He's like, it was really fascinating. I really enjoyed it. And I'm like, really? Listen to it? I'm like, I would think that you'd be like, oh, let me skip this one. But that's awesome. For me, it was like a great reflection of his character and how he doesn't want to live in an echo chamber, that he went out of his way to listen to that episode, even though he could have just assumed like this is somebody I disagree with. Why do I want to hear somebody spewing some socialist bullshit, and just skipped it? But he's like, you know what? Instead of me dismissing it, let me listen to it and then see how, what he says. And I might still disagree with him, but he might make some points that challenge what I believe, and then I can decide like, okay, let me think this out, and I can come to a conclusion and decide that like, no, I still stand where I stand. Or you can say, hey, maybe I found something that I need to think out better, and I didn't think out as well as I should. So I love those type of people, Charlie, who and I mean, I like yourself, I've heard you in the past, and you don't seem to get offended or upset if you disagree with somebody. You're open to having the discussion, and that's what we need more of. Like Rogan just had Gina Carano on, and I was like,
that's fun.
Yeah, which is awesome. Like he literally
was it a good conversation.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. He just had, even though Rogan, he's funny because I do get and I don't get why he does what he does. Like he always tries to downplay the conspiracy that is COVID. I'm like, dude, you had Dr. Peter McCullough on your show. He talked for hours, and everything he said was right. And it basically highlighted how this could not be all happen chance, and it couldn't all be coincidental. Like there was drugs being suppressed on purpose. There were doctors being suppressed on purpose. You can't say this was all just like we did.
Effects being suppressed on purpose.
So, but of course, he always does this where it's like it's hilarious because what came out in that podcast is that he's in the process of reading the real Anthony Fauci, Robert Kennedy Jr. book, and he talked about it. He's like, oh, I didn't want to. He's like, I kind of avoided reading it for a while, and he's like, now I'm deep into it, and he's like, dude, I'm just like, he's like, I'm so deep into it, and it's almost like he ignorance is bliss. Like he was almost talking about it like I'd almost rather not know all this stuff is going on, but he didn't disprove it, or he didn't dismiss it, I should say, where he's like, oh, it's all conspiracy theory, or oh, I'm gonna kind of wait before I judge, or I have to do some more research, or he makes some valid points. No, he literally seemed like he was believing everything that that Robert Kennedy Jr. wrote in that book, and I think he even said something like it was really well researched and all the information in there. And I actually have it laying over here somewhere, and it is a really good book. But the fact that he's going down that rabbit hole, it's like, dude, that it's not like this wasn't just, you can't just call it all ignorance, or he would keep saying, like he said this with Gina would say, oh, like I think they did it on purpose, and I don't know specifically what she meant, like if it was like the release of the virus, or the force feeding the vaccine as the only treatment, or what exactly, or maybe she feels like it was everything about it was on purpose, which, if you know about Event 201, which I'm sure Rogan has talked about on his show once or twice, like if you know about Event 201, like it's not that hard to believe that they did see this all coming, and they knew how to handle all of it and how to treat it and how everybody was going to react. So, but to make a long story short, and well, it's already long, so I'm just going to try to get to my point. It does bother me that he still says, yeah, but in the beginning, like, early 2020, like we didn't know, and that's why people were put on ventilators, because we just didn't know that like 80% of them were going to die. Oh, people were afraid, and I think politicians want to shut down the country because they just didn't know how bad it was going to be. Some people didn't know, like the majority of people didn't know. But the experts that were force feeding you this stuff and telling you like the lockdown, and like the Dr. Fauci's and the Deborah Birx. I mean, that video of Deborah Birx, Dr. Deborah Birx, saying how when she was a part of the task force, and they're basically telling the public that the vaccine is better than natural immunity, and it will stop you from getting it and spreading it. Like she said in front of Congress, like, she's like, yeah, we were hoping the vaccine would do that. It's like, you said stuff with certainty as a authority figure. You're on the task force. People went to you for answers. A lot of people were just full of anxiety and confusion, and they're afraid. And watching those press conferences, they were hanging on every word you would say so they could figure out, like, okay, like, how should I handle this? What's going on? So you knew every word mattered, and you guys were openly giving false information. And then all the bullshit with, like, the people who are dying with the virus, not by the virus. Like, dude, there's plenty of doctors and hospitals that they've been in the medical world long enough where they understand, like, this isn't a cause of death if you just have a virus in your system that isn't really causing any symptoms. It's like they knew that they were inflating the numbers. They knew. I mean, it was all. And again, not everybody was a part of it, and not everybody knew. But the people in power, the people who were pushing the policies, the Faucis who were going on 60 Minutes saying a mask doesn't do bullshit, and then soon after says, oh, everybody should wear a mask. Like, you got caught lying. Like, regardless if you were lying for a just cause or not, because that was the argument, was like, oh, he didn't want masks to go to sell out. And it's like, well, if that was the case, if you truly believe masks could save somebody, what you should have said was, hey, we're going to sell out of masks. We don't have enough. Everybody should be wearing one. Make one at home. Take a rag. Just put something on your face. Anything will help. And it's like, and if you really thought they would save lives, you're basically saying you're a murderer, because there's plenty of people who could have wore a mask and saved lives and didn't because you were giving the wrong advice. Like, none of it makes any fucking logical sense. So it's just, to me, my frustration with Rogan is that he still tries to give them the benefit of the doubt. It's like, dude, you had Dr. Robert Malone on your show. You had Dr. Peter McCullough on your show. You had Brett Weinstein on your show. You had, who's the other guy? He's from England. He's like a Middle Eastern journalist. No, he's from the Middle East, I believe, originally, but he has a Middle Eastern name. He was on Tim Pool also, and he's like, I forget what his name is, but another guy who just went like a whole 3 hours just tearing apart the mainstream narrative. And like, you listen to these guys, you had freaking the CNN bullshit doctor, Dr. Sanjay Gupta on your show, who openly lied, who couldn't win in a debate. He's a medical doctor. He's a doctor with a PhD and literally is a specialist on CNN on these topics. And Rogan, who is a comedian and podcaster and MMA guy, literally was beating you in a debate, and this is your expertise, and that, like, the only reason you're making him look bad was because the truth was on your side, and he was trying to lie. And then he openly goes on CNN, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and then lies some more, and it just, the whole thing. It's like, dude, he went on fucking Sesame Street and lied to kids. Like, this dude's a scumbag, and he would still give Dr. Sanjay Gupta the benefit of the doubt. He would go, oh, well, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, like,
he does every time. He does every time whenever he's mentioned on his show.
Yeah, when Dr. Peter McCullough brought him up, and Dr. Peter McCullough is like, yeah, but you know what? When he was on, why would he? When he went on Sesame Street, that was I forget how he worded it, but he brought up when he was on Sesame Street and how wrong that was. And Rogan's like, yeah, that was kind of messed up. It's like, Rogan, you see it, like you. So this is the thing is, I don't want to judge, because I know it's really easy to say, Rogan this, Rogan that, blah, blah, blah. He's just shill, blah, blah. First of all, he's not a shill. He would never have had Dr. Robert Malone or Dr. Peter McCullough on in the first place, and he definitely wouldn't keep inviting his boy Eddie Bravo on if he was really a shill. But, but my point is, like, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt because, one, he has done some. I mean, just having Dr. Sanjay Gupta on and not. Like, I think he was friendlier to Dr. Sanjay Gupta after the episode than he was on the episode. I think he actually went to him hard when he's like, you guys openly lied about me taking horse medication on your channel. Like, he called him out on stuff. And but I think that he is one of those people that he tries to find the good in people. I think, sometimes coming to the conclusion that the world is as fucked up as it actually is something that's really hard to digest and really hard to cope with. and it's almost easier to just see the world as like I'm just a podcaster, I'm just having these conversations, and it's how he stays sane, and maybe the world isn't as corrupt as it seems, and he gives people the benefit of the doubt. Or it also could be the fact that he understands that every word that he says is analyzed to the max by everybody and anybody, and
Yeah.
that's like that pressure. I mean, I recently had Dave Rubin on my show. I was telling somebody recently how like it's the first time in a long time I got nervous. Like I had like kind of a stressful day, and I was kind of running around, and then I'm like, oh shit, Dave Rubin's on. He's kind of a bigger guest. I'm stressing because I'm like, I'm not sure exactly what I want to talk to him about. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle this. I haven't talked to him in years. Last time he was on, he was recently on, so it was, I don't know, 400 and something episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. But last time he was on, it was like episode 95 or something, So I'm like, it's been a long time. I'm like, it's so, and I got a little nervous. And back in the day, I used to get nervous all the fucking time. It was like regular for me. It was on regular basis where I would get like to the point where I would almost not want to release the episode because I'm like, I sound like such a dumbass because I had so many things running through my head. I could not gather which question I wanted to ask. So I end up rambling and not asking any like a freaking idiot. And so I'm like, and that's just the pressure of like, how many thousands of downloads I get. Like it's not big numbers. He's millions of downloads, and so it's like the pressure of, and if I say something dumb, it's not trending on Twitter the next day. No
True.
mainstream article is going to write a whole op-ed on me. They're not going to, I'm not going to be headline news. CNN's not going to talk about me. So that type of pressure, and to the point where there's a little bit of a pressure in regards to, just think about like the pressure of just being famous. But his fame was so big that it became powerful. Like what he said changed things. What he said influenced things. I remember when Kratom was being demonized in the media, and then I had Chris Bell on my show. I've had Mark Bell also, but Chris Bell to talk about his documentary, A Leaf of Faith, about Kratom and how it was helping people with pain and anxiety and depression, all this stuff. And then the government was trying to ban it and demonize it. And Rogan had him on for the same reason. When he was on my show, pretty sure nothing changed. Like I probably didn't save Kratom. Maybe I participated a little bit, but I didn't really. I'm pretty sure I didn't do much. He went on Rogan, and next thing you know, like he literally saves Kratom. Like he, politicians get involved and got all this awareness too. So it's like to have that type of influence and impact. It's to me, it's incredible that he can still have any, like that his show has any feel of a casual conversation, because the fact that he can still seem to have a casual conversation, knowing outside those walls, once that show's released, like, everything's going to be something, and every word that's said, every opinion that he has, is going to be something. But what he understands is something that I think more of us need to understand, that once you turn on, all you have to do is turn off your phone. All you have to do is not go on Twitter. All you have to do is not read your comments. All you have to do is live in your, whatever, mile radius of your life, where it's like your loved ones are close to you, the restaurants you go to, the liquor stores you go to, the people you hang out with are all in this world. And what happens outside of this isn't really that important. So if billions of people are talking about you on the internet, who cares? Who are they? Like, they're not saying it to my face, and I can just turn it off, which in a way, the internet gives them power because they can connect with you or say things to you online and get people talking and get people fired up. But it also gives us power because it means I can also turn it off, and I don't have to watch it, and I don't have to listen to it, and I don't have, as podcasters, we've all been through it where, well, you get caught up with like what people are saying about you online. Like you read like 1,000 positive comments, and then the one negative one is the one that sticks with you and bothers you. And it gets to a point where just like, who is that person? Like if I met them and I sat them down, I might be like, his opinion really shouldn't matter because he doesn't really have really well thought out opinions, or he's just a extremist on these views or whatever. Like I have friends of mine.
Just a troll having a bad day, and if you sat down with him, he would not ever say the thing he just said. You know what I
You're
mean?
right. Yeah, and that's so true. I mean, I have friends of mine. I think about this sometimes. I'm like, I have friends of mine that on many topics I don't respect their opinion. Like I'm just like, you know what? Like you have this opinion, but I know you didn't research anything. I know you haven't looked into this. This is just like this is what I think. Okay, you think that way, but it's not backed by any real deep thought. So if those friends were online saying, I disagree with you or you're an idiot or whatever to somebody else, I would tell, that content creator, like, listen, I'm friends with this dude. He hasn't thought this out at all. He has these opinions that come from anywhere. It could be because of whatever he watched on TV or whatever, and he doesn't really do deep thinking about these issues. So don't let his opinion bother you. That's what I would say to them. Guess what? Like a lot of those people are online. Like they're not deep thinkers. They're people who are, like you said, they're just trolls. And the crazy thing about trolls is like there's people who openly embrace being a troll. Like they know they're trolls. Everybody around them knows they're trolls. The only people who don't know they're trolls are sometimes the content creators who get that shitty comment, and then it's like, oh my God, like you think this is this might be a reasonable person who really hates me this much, and then you feel bad because you're like, what if this reasonable person is right, or what if I am a jerk, or what if and then you start just planting that seed of doubt about who you are and what you think or whatever, and when really it's just a troll who's getting a kickoff, the rocks off from it, and they're just
energy vampires, man. They feed off of that. That's what their intent is, to cause chaos, and then they just it's crazy, man.
Filter out as you get older. You have to filter that stuff out. Like I always try to. People are always like, "Oh, you're so calm." I shouldn't say people are always like that, because if you ask my wife, she would say the opposite. But well, I am. I mean, she wouldn't. She wouldn't say the opposite. I wouldn't say. I try to stay calm as much as possible. And but of course, like we're all humans, we have moments of weaknesses and whatnot. And but one thing I try to do often is like reflect on those moments and try to improve on those moments. And but a lot of it is just my willingness to be okay with being wrong. Like I'm okay with being wrong. I don't take it personally. I'm not trying, as I get older, I filter out people who are really argumentative, people who I'm like, okay, I'm not going to benefit from this conversation. I try to filter out people who stress me out, or people who I just don't have good relationships with, or maybe I butt heads with too often. Like I'm just like, okay, like maybe I should just like try to filter these people out, because they add anxiety or stress or some type of negative energy to me. And if I don't filter them out, that negative energy is going to end up affecting somebody that I don't want to be negative towards. It's going to affect me because you're bringing this negative energy. Now, when I interact with my kids or my wife or whoever, and I don't want to be negative, like this negative energy is on my shoulders, and it's affecting my mood, and then you've made my fuse so small that now something that I would typically become about, now I'm losing my temper quicker, so it's like, and that's the same thing with the trolls. So the same way in your personal life you should filter those people out, it's the same way that online you should also filter those people out. When I was online during the COVID era, and just just sharing articles or whatever, people would just, and people would lose their freaking mind over everything. And like I just didn't let it get to me. And my wife would be like, do you see what blah 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 said about you? I'm like, no. And honestly, if I did see it, it wouldn't bother me, and it's not going to bother me enough for me to even look at it. Like I don't care. I'm trying to help people by putting this information out there. I feel better knowing I'm doing my part, or I'm doing a part by putting the information out there. If people get upset, people get upset. Like I can't make everybody happy, and that's a ridiculous pursuit. If you're trying to make everybody happy, you have to live with the fact that some people, and you don't know why they feel the way they feel. Maybe it's fear of their own lives. Maybe it's, there's somebody else that has similar views that they hate, and they're like, so now I don't like anybody who has these views because, they resemble somebody that I dislike. It's kind of like names resemble people, like Gina, for example. It's actually my wife's name too, and every Gina I've ever known has been pretty. So every time I hear Gina, I think pretty. And then there's certain names like Susie or whatever, where like every Susie I've ever known has not been pretty. So every time I think Susie, I think like, okay, not a pretty girl, So it's like it's the same type of thing. So it's you probably have some questions, and I'm just rambling on like an idiot.
I mean, this is what we do on the show, man. We just have conversations. Yeah, this is great, man. Yeah. Yeah, with Rogan, it's just he's an enigma, man. It's one of those things. It's like he's definitely made more money than God, so he has like fuck you money. He could, and so that you go down that rabbit hole with him. And you're like, why doesn't he just tell everyone to go fuck themselves? Why didn't he tell Spotify, give him the middle finger, and instead of taking some of his videos down and things like that? But I get what you mean too, where he's like everything he says is so publicized, like his show, if he says something controversial, it's going to be on CNN the next day. They're going to take him out of context and not give him any credit, or you know what I mean, give him the benefit of the doubt. And so that's just you just have to kind of take Rogan for who he is, and just kind of enjoy the show, because.
And that's the right attitude. Like, I'm glad you're like that, because I see people online sometimes say, Rogan's a shill, like blah blah blah, in the comments of whatever. If I'm on another show, or if I'm just reading, if I'm watching something and I see people bring up Rogan, you get these camps where like Rogan's a shill, Sam Tripoli's a shill. I'm like, I feel like you've made it once somebody calls you. Nobody's called me a shill, which is why I still feel like that's I'm not really as accomplished as I'd like to be. But it just, to me, it's like you can say with every person, you could say, okay, there's some things that I disagree with that they've promoted, or people that they've had on that I'm not a fan of, whatever. But yet, like, you still can't ignore the fact that he had Dr. Sanjay Gupta on. And remember, this was like when COVID was still the topic of the day, where it still dominated the news and it was still dominating our lives. And yet he had him on not to be friendly with them, but he knew that, it was going to be a debate, and he was completely okay with basically exposing him the whole show. And then he still had Peter McCullough on and Dr. Robert Malone. So it's like he knows that he has a huge platform, and to have a huge platform and bring those people on that what they're going to say, like Dr. Robert Malone and Dr. Peter McCullough were not doing other interviews saying that, hey, everybody should get vaccinated and COVID is dangerous. Like, there was much of the time they were saying the opposite. So it's like he still had them on and let them use his platform to get those messages out. Like, so you can't say that a shill would do all that, because even if he was, okay, let's pretend he was a shill. Like, oh, that's only because, he wants to earn your trust. Well, guess what? There's a lot of fucking people that, like, he changed their mind, or at least planted the seed of doubt in regards to COVID and what was going on. So if his job was just to be a shill, like, they did not succeed, because millions and millions and millions of people who did not know who Dr. Peter McCullough was, now he's a household name. Same thing with Dr. Robert Malone. So this idea that they're a shill, like, no, you can just disagree with people sometimes. Like, there's a lot of people that I disagree with on certain things. Like, I don't think they're shills just because they're promoting 9/11 is a perfect example. You see the shill term get thrown around left and right. Like, he's a shill because he thinks that, lasers took down the towers. He's a shill because he doesn't think any planes hit the towers. He's a shill. And I'm just like, okay, if their purpose is to get, like, to expose some corruption, or some get people to look at these events and say, hey, it's not what you think happened, then I think, we're kind of all fighting the same fight and for the same purpose. And we can disagree on the details, but once you get past those details, it's like we're all trying to expose government corruption, geopolitical strategies, like the military industrial complex. Like we're all kind of trying to expose the same people. Now, what happened, we might disagree about, or how it happened, but we shouldn't now focus our energy on people that are fighting the same fight for the same reasons, and you see that happen a lot in the alternative media community.
Yeah, 100%, man. And I mean, let's say he was a shill. There was more benefit than there was loss, right? And like, I love what Monica Perez says, that you can learn a lot more sometimes from a limited hangout, anyways, right? And so I like to hear the opposite opinions. Like, my very best friend is an ANCOM and is maybe, or I will not say that he is or is not in Antifa, or so he's wildly to the left from me. He's still my best friend. We still have these crazy fucking conversations. I learn a lot from him, dude. He's fucking brilliant. He's fucking smart. We have these crazy deep conversations, and I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, some of my best nights out and my best conversations with my friends have been disagreements, like where we're having long, drawn out conversations about disagreements we may have. And it's funny because like sometimes if we're together with friends or family members and we're having these long discussions, sometimes my kids will be, because they don't understand that like you can disagree for a long period of time. It was funny because just recently I did this with my brother-in-law. He's a big baseball fan, and I told him how baseball players are the worst athletes on earth. And I was kind of a little bit just kind of messing around with them, but and I'm like, they're not good athletes. You don't have to be a good athlete to be a baseball player. And so it just kind of sparked this conversation, and we're like stating our points, but it was a fun discussion, and we're kind of stating our points. And my kids always, even something as harmless as that, my kids think that if we're disagreeing, then we must be arguing or fighting. So my son will be like, Dad, you guys should stop fighting. And it's like, well, no, we're not fighting. We're just disagreeing. Like, it's not, and I want him to understand that a disagreement isn't something that you should just avoid. It's not something that has to be a fight. It can be beneficial, and it can be a learning process, and it can be a tool to grow.
It can be a lot of fun. I love arguments, not like a heated yelling argument, but that's one of my favorite things to do with my coworkers. And my current coworker doesn't enjoy it so much, and now I have to argue with myself. But I love when somebody there's an art to an argument, and there's we can sit there, we can go back, and we can discuss, and then we can find new points, and we can drive it a new place. Yeah, I love arguing. Probably should have been a lawyer or something. I don't know.
Well, it's funny you say that, because it's I'm very similar, where I don't actually like arguing in regards to just two people trying, where it's a pissing contest and it's just two people trying to be right. I like having discussions with people that are going to challenge my ideas and but more importantly, are also okay with me challenging their ideas, and they don't take offense to it. They don't take it personally. It doesn't have to be an argument, but it's just okay, I think you're wrong about this, and this is why. And then you tell me, in return, why you think I'm wrong. And we all grow, and we all learn from that. And growing up, I used to love finding debates online. I would find, a socialist against, a capitalist, or a whatever against a whatever. And some of them, I will say, you could tell, okay, these people aren't here to try to learn anything. They're here just to defend their team. But in the process of defending their team, I'm going to learn something, because what's happening is that this idea is being challenged, and then this idea is being challenged, and that idea is being challenged. And even though they might not be challenging it for moral reasons, or good reasons, I should say, not for the reason of growing and learning, they're challenging it because they're defending their team. I'm growing and learning from it, and I'm getting something from it. And so it's that same spirit is what I love in my own discussions with my own friends, is I want to have my ideas challenged, and I want to grow and learn. And if I'm wrong, I want to admit that I'm wrong, because it means that now I'm one step closer to being right. And I don't want my ego to get in the way. and just be like this know-it-all, where just, it's like that saying, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. Like, that's how I want to be. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I don't want to be the guy who always wants to one up somebody or know everything. I want to be the guy where I'm surrounded by fascinating people who I'm like, oh shit, I never thought of it that way, or, oh, I didn't even know about that, or, I never read that book. Like, I want people around me who are gonna enlighten me in some things, and I think we should all strive to do that. That's why I think ego typically gets in the way. That's one thing I love about sports, is that it really exposes how much ego is involved in your decision making. Like, if you're wide open for a shot, but you have a teammate who's a little bit more open, do you give it up to that teammate for the, or does your ego get in the way and say, no, I want to make the shot because I want to get the confidence boost, or I want all eyes on me, or I want to get the credit, and so that's kind of one thing I kind of like about sports, is that it does force you to have to, and some people don't force themselves to do it, but for myself, like, I've always used it as a exercise to kind of force myself to understand what's influencing my decision making. Is it my ego, or am I really doing something for, a learning purpose? Am I doing something for something, much bigger than just massaging my own ego, which I think it has a huge part of every aspect of our lives. The way we look at things, the things we argue with, the things we don't. When somebody proves you wrong, so especially if it's somebody who you're like, okay, they're right, but this a-hole is going to rub it in my face if I, and it's like, I try to be honest, where just like, if somebody, even if it's somebody that I know that's going to bust my balls about it afterwards, and it wants to prove me right or prove me wrong, not for the purpose of like, just trying to learn something, but because they just, because you get those people who, like, they want to be right all the time, and it's like, it's hard to give them anything because yeah, you're like, now I'm like, now you win, because, like, okay, you actually are right in this one circumstance, and but I'm okay with that too, and if anything, like, I'm gonna benefit from it, and if you want to keep that same type of pattern of thinking, is going to at some point affect your ability to grow and learn. So it's I mean, so much of these conversations, like, start internally, in regards to, like, okay, let me figure out, how do I explore the world without ego getting in the way, without other outside influences, maybe trauma, maybe whatever it may be that could affect the way I look at the world, and let me examine things as clearly as possible. And that's really hard to do. And it also, to fight against the tribalistic perspective of, like, just I picked a team, this team seems to make the most sense, so now this is my team, and now, even if it's not verbally agreed upon, internally you feel like I have to defend that team, or at least have to defend the ideas that my team defends. And
I think that's been a big thing for me this year, actually, well, the last 2 years, I'm not on anybody's team anymore. Like, I don't even really call myself a libertarian anymore. I am, because I adhere to the non-aggression principle. Like, I think that's, like, philosophically and morally correct, but I'm definitely not in the Libertarian Party. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to be on anybody's team. Like you said, like, when you are shown that you're incorrect, you still have to defend it, because this is your team. And that team mentality, that tribal mentality, is why we're in, so many predicaments that we're in right now. Because, like, let's say Abby Martin actually heard some arguments that maybe would blow her mind about, like, the coronavirus or something. She can't let that go. You know what I mean? She can't, because, I mean, that would be giving one to the other side. And God forbid you let the other side have one. It just, that whole tribal mentality. Yeah, that is interesting, man, for sure. Don't pick a team. Pick the truth. And I like getting my mind blown. If somebody proves me like that I'm wrong, I'm like, okay, that's great. Now I can be right about something, You get closer to the truth when you get proven wrong.
Yeah, and not choosing a team is, I mean, you can say, like, hey, I agree with this team on a lot of things. And it's funny, because even the non-aggression principle, it's a libertarian, idea, or it gets adopted by the libertarians a lot. But I mean, you could even make the argument that like socialists should also agree to that. Like, which ism shouldn't agree that we should be nicer to, we shouldn't be aggressive towards one another, and we shouldn't be able to force our ideas on other people. So it's yeah. I mean, that's I I'm okay with agreeing with somebody who did pick a team, but I just hope that if their team doesn't, they're not promoting something that makes sense, that their ego doesn't get in the way of seeing that you can say, okay, even if you do pick a team, like if I consider myself a libertarian or a socialist or whatever, then when a point is made that exposes the flaws in my team's thinking, that I'm willing to say, hey, you know what, like in this one point they're wrong or they're incorrect, or maybe we have to rethink this or whatever. And that's important. The extreme, at the end of the day, like extremes in any ideology is really the most dangerous people, because they're not open to even examining what they think or what they believe. They ignorantly, blindly just believe what they believe, and there's no changing their mind, and those people are dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, they're dangerous, and they're dangerous to other people and to themselves, and it's actually kind of sad. They're just in like you said, the echo chamber, and it's just, yeah, that's a bummer. Well, Ricky, I've had you on a little bit over an hour. I'm sorry, buddy. I thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. Do you want to give your plugs one more time?
Yeah. So the rippleeffectpodcast.com is the best place to find all my links. Like I said in the beginning of the show, you can find the videos just about everywhere, and then the audio everywhere also. I know there's recently been some people contacting me about issues with Spotify. I'm not surprised. That's kind of why I try to, bet on all numbers. It's like, instead of just assuming that, hey, let me put all my stuff on Spotify because it's safe, or let me just put my stuff on here. It's like I post it everywhere, so that way, if by any chance Rumble eventually ends up censoring, or BitChute or whatever, you can still find it on Odyssey and Rockfin and other places. So it's who knows which one's going to end up being the next YouTube. Maybe there will never be another YouTube, and there'll just be multiple streaming services, which is, I think, good too, because competition, as I think you would agree with, is good. And but yeah, the rippleeffectpodcast.com, and then also the union of the unwanted.com, which we'll have to get Nate on in a future one. I think the next one is, and who was I just telling recently about this? I was telling, because it was somebody else who, I was talking to somebody who's never been on one, and I was talking about when the next one's going to be. The next one's supposed to be scheduled, because it's every other Monday typically, and the next one's supposed to be on the 4th, but that's a horrendous day to have a live show because nobody's going to be watching. So we're going to postpone it to the 11th. So if you're around and you want to join us on the 11th, join us on the 11th, and come to the Union of the Unwanted. People can watch it live on Rockfin, and and then if they don't watch it live, they can listen to it the next day on all the audio platforms. So I think it might probably be a general topic show, which I like doing. Those shows also, because sometimes we have a specific topic that the Union of the Unwanted brings in guests just on those topics. We've done one on like cryptocurrency and whatnot, but and we've done one on, actually, it was a really fascinating one on near-death experiences, which is really fascinating, and just all these authors and filmmakers and experts in that field. It was really fascinating. But I think the 11th is going to be a general topic one, and we'll probably just gather some really interesting people like yourself and bounce some ideas off each other.
That's awesome, man. I hope all my guests go and follow you, and thank you so much, brother. I'm going to hit the outro, and I'll see you in a little.
Thanks, Nate. Take care.